Welcome, everyone. My name is Kimberly Bradley. I'm the Conversations Curator at Art Basel in Basel. Our panel today takes a deeper dive into the practices of two artists present in other sectors of the fair. All the way to the end is Stephanie Comilang. She has a wonderful project in parkour on Straße. I can only recommend going and checking it out. In the center is Seba Calfuqueo, thank you. At Unlimited, there's a beautiful ceramics piece, and you are performing every day. Tomorrow at 1 p.m., I believe, is the next round of your performing, or are you performing tonight too?
It's 1 p.m.
1 p.m.
every day.
Tomorrow. The panel will also look at where their practices overlap, ideas of home, land, migration, sea, resources. Moderating this panel is Dr. Senam Okudzeto, an educator and artist based here in Basel. There will be time for questions at the end of the hour. I'd like for everyone to give our speakers a big round of applause. And enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Kimberly. And thank you, Seba and Stephanie, for being here. I actually started with a little brief introduction to your practices, although we have a small introduction. So Seba Calfuqueo, I knew I said it wrong. Seba Calfuqueo is a Mapuche artist born in Santiago, Chile, who lives and works in Huamapu, Chile. Working across a variety of mediums, her ecofeminist practices range from video installation through sculpture, ceramics, and finally multimedia installation and performance, as we see in Art Basel and Limited. And Calfuqueo's practice, Calfuqueo's practice confronts practices of historic and contemporary injustice, be they ecological, social, or discriminations of imposed gender binaries, in remarkably poetic and yet uncompromising ways, often using her own body to invoke not only the urgencies of the natural world, but also the ease of gender fluidity, a way of being that flows as naturally as water weaving through the landscape, insisting that nature itself refuses binary categories. Their work invites a critical reflection on the social, cultural, and political status of the indigenous subject within contemporary Chilean society, and presents narrative text elements in Mapuzungun, Spanish, and English. And Seba Calfuqueo's work, sorry, I'm an idiot, has been exhibited in Chile, Peru, Brazil, Mexico, United States, Germany, Spain, UK, Switzerland, Sweden, Australia. They were awarded the Municipalidad de Santiago Award in 2017 and the Premio Fundación Fava in 2018. And there's much more to say. Stephanie Comilang is a Filipino-Canadian artist and filmmaker who's based in Berlin. Her documentary-based works reflect on themes of migration, cultural hybridity, and technology in relation to concepts of home and diaspora, and cyclical economic migrations. Her installation work, Search for Life 2024, can be seen in this year's Art Basel parcours, not far from the Messe on Klauerstrasse. We're shortly going to see a small video extract of a related film, Search for Life. Stephanie Comilang's documentary work fuses his research, historical fact, and biographical experiences with fictional narratives, creating a radical historical lens which makes the viewer feel an urgent need to keep exploring newfound knowledge and historical understandings. Comilang's work also includes unusual structural devices, multiple voices, narratives, and personas which might be enacted through an unseen character embodied through a drone, perhaps with the voice of her mother. Surprisingly, these fictional elements help to emphasize themes of social mobility, global labor, and intercultural communication, as well as an analysis of the exploitation of migrant workers. Her works show various hidden difficulties faced by laborers, so harsh that even finding and creating community is difficult due to conditions that are so exacting, all-consuming, and impossibly cruel. Comilang has shown her work at the International Film Festival Rotterdam, the Asia Art Archive in America, SALT, Basel, UCA Los Angeles, the Bangkok Video and Performance Triennial, amongst many others. She's the winner of the 2019 Sobe Award, one of Canada's top contemporary art prizes. So thank you very much to both of you. They are far more accomplished than these very small biographies, and from very different backgrounds and part of the world. And so I was wondering how we could start this conversation in the common grounds of your practice. Both of you have research-based practice. I think Seba Calfuqueo's work is very reliant on metaphor and then incorporates historic facts. So with your performance piece in The Unlimited, there is a Water Rights Act. Can you tell me a little bit about it and the date of the Water Rights Act that you start with?
Yeah. Well, mari kompu lamien kompu eno incheta Seba Calfuqueo pinyen artista ka mapucheñen. Hi everyone, my name is Seba Calfuqueo. I am artist from Chile, from the Mapuche territory, the Mapuche community. I'm very glad for be here with all of you and stay here, speak about my practice and the word Kota Mapungeika is in Unlimited. Water is also territory. It's a word about the privatization of water in my country. Chile is one of the countries of the world has a privatization of water since of the dictatorship times. We have a lot of struggle today about the water crisis. This word in Unlimited talk about the idea what happened when the neoliberalization of water happens and what means the neoliberalization of water, because in my case, in my country, the water is not an element, it's not life, it's an object. An object can be sold in the market for a price, and for that reason is very problematic because not all the people, all the community have the access for the water. And the word has two parts, a poetical way. First, speak about the water's meaning in the Mapuche culture. For us, the water is not an object, it's a spirit. It's something that we have conversation, we have affects, we have love, and I don't know, we have a lot of communication with the waters. But in the neoliberal system in my country, it's not like that. Water is something just put in the market. And for that reason, I combine these two ways to think about the water, and I create this piece, all making in ceramics first. And I play the performance every day in Unlimited. At 1 p.m., you're super invited to come. The performance talk about the water code in my country. The water code consider the water as an object, and it's a, I don't know, it's like it's super problematic. We're living in the constitution created for the dictator. And we're still living in that situation. And for me, it's a very local situation, but I think the artwork can help us to create this conversation together. And this work from my local community is a global conversation. Yeah. And I think it's very important to show this work too in this place, in the context. The Swiss country is country of waters. It's a country, for me it's very complicated, saw this city and look every font running the water every day, every moment. And I think I have a lot of connection, and I think it's really important to show other perspective about the water with Nestle and everything. And I think we decide with my gallery Labor to show this work because we think make a resonance here very strong about the water situation.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I think before we move on to Stephanie's work, it's very important to say that your work has ecological perspectives that go beyond just the commodification of water, but the commodification of land, extraction of forests, and the destruction of the resource of water as well. And so within various works of yours, the way in which extraction threatens water and destroys the flow of water, you use your body to then embody the violence enacted it on the landscape, on water, on nature itself. And I think there's a way in which you've said, like, within Mapuche culture, there's no distinction between human beings and nature. The two are one. But also this wonderful way in which you describe to me that within your work on non-binary and trans rights, that colonialism is an imposition of the binary. And I want to actually come back to that, but I also want to then talk to Stephanie, because you also deal with themes of water, but in very different ways in your work. You have works which talk about migratory experiences of Filipino workers, and also labor rights, and within that, human rights. And there was this wonderful film you have online. A lot of the work of both artists can be accessed open source, so I encourage you to sort of go and look them up. And there was one of your films which features Filipino cargo workers. And so I found out from you that 25% of cargo workers in the world are of Filipino origin, which was mind-blowing. But would you maybe like to talk a little bit about how water occurs in a theme in your work?
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you again for having me, and it's so nice that you're all here, and thank you so much for coming. I guess water, in a certain way, in my work is different from how you deal with water. In the work in Search for Life, I was looking at global maritime trade routes. I was looking at the connections between Acapulco and Manila for 300 years during the Manila Galeons and what was traded, objects that were traded, how that affected culture to culture. And then I was also looking exactly at workers on ships. And as you said, 25% of the workers are from the Philippines. So that piqued my interest. Aside from that, I was looking at, the route of the monarch butterfly. I guess that's a different one. But water is interesting because it carries ships historically, and what are on those ships really affects the place that it goes to. So in terms of like silver and the pineapple, for instance, these are things that maybe we don't necessarily think about when we think about water, what's carried on the water. So these are the things that I usually look to in my work.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you for bringing up silver and pineapples, because that would draw us to one of the historic links between your work, which is Spanish colonialism. Because I think around the same period, 1550, the Spanish are colonizing what is now Chile, and the Mapuche people, I think, had a 300-year successful resistance against Spanish colonialism, being like the last to fall in the 1880s. And the Philippines are also colonized by the Spanish in the same period in the 1550s, with the Spanish trying to create control over the trade routes and the over 7,000 islands that comprise the Philippines. And so I think there's a critical aspect of your work which has a common root of an anti-colonial discourse, and it's the same colonization. So through exchange, the Spanish extractivist colonial practices in Latin America bring silver to the Philippines, am I right?
From Mexico, yeah. So the Philippines, Manila was a main port for very, very long, because there were Chinese traders there before the Spanish came, actually. And so things were being traded there, but colonialism hadn't quite come yet, really. Like, it was really trade. So the Chinese, so Manila has the oldest Chinatown in the world, actually. Chinese have been there for so long, and that was a big commodity for the Chinese, so it was currency. So that was what was really what they wanted, and that's what was being brought from Mexico. Going back were people, Filipinos, because they're maritime people, were very good on ships. So they used them as laborers or slaves. to work on the ships. And actually, I didn't know this, but there's a large number of Filipinos in Guerrero, the province of Guerrero. Genetically, there's a lot of Filipino genes there. Maybe, I think it's like 10% or something, which is pretty interesting. So a large number of Filipinos ended up in Mexico. So this is something that I never really thought about, you know, this exchange of people. And then also the culture that comes with it. Like, what are the things that the people bring with them? It's something that is super interesting for me.
Super interesting. And I think somewhere I read, and I have to be very careful I don't land in the brief moment in Wikipedia and not the real texts that you sent me. Never trust Wikipedia. I landed on a text that said that when the Spanish arrived in Mapuche, they didn't find silver.
No, the silver is a very interesting conversation because we usually dress silver for protect. But the silver was an introduction from the colonization, and we create these new pieces for protect us with the silver.
Wow.
But the silver was not in the territory before. And one of the things that I want to say about the Chile context is the colonization is still happening.
Yes.
And still running because the Chilean state made the colonization in the final part of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. It's very recent, and we still have problem with the Chilean state. A lot of region of the Mapuche territory are militarized now with the police, with the military campaign and everything, and we're still living in this colonial process.
With terrible human rights abuses constantly, and some very strict anti-terrorist laws, or to stop demonstration and to stop the fight for the sovereignty of the Mapuche territory.
All the anti-terrorist law was used for the Mapuche people, all. And I think one of the most terrible part of that is the people defend the land and later going to the jail because the state think protect the land is the same as a terrorism.
Yeah.
And the situation is very problematic now with the forestal company. And this is a very problematic situation because the forestal or monoculture idea of Pinus eucalyptus.
And they bring pine trees and eucalyptus for sale globally and destroying the local forests.
Yeah.
And these are also very water intensive farming that are killing the ecology and draining the water from the land.
Yeah, and all the land is dry now because they made this monocultural forest. They say forest, but for us it's not a forest. And they create all these crises of water. And the conflict is until today. We have a lot of people killing by the state and jail. And I don't know, I have a lot of struggle about that.
It's crazy. And also I think it's very important, therefore, that within your work you also use the Mapuche language, because this is also something that under these different colonial structures, first Spanish, then Chilean, the language fell. What's the percentage of people in Mapuche that still speak Mapuche?
The Mapuche people in Chile is less 10%.
But you're the largest indigenous culture.
It's the most important indigenous community in my country. And in Mapuche community is not only in Chile, it's in Argentina too.
Yeah.
The both states made the colonization at the same time, and they create this colonial state. The Argentina state, for example, has the same problem as Chile with the indigenous community. The problem is the defense of the land. That is the reason, because, for example, the Chilean state create a law for the forestal company give a subvention of the state because they make a restitution of lands. That is the law they apply for the...
So they made a law to stop the restitution of land to Mapuche because now land rights are in favor of large corporations.
Yeah.
This is super interesting. So I think within both of your works, there are interesting themes where I think that historic colonialism is not addressed so directly as the structural remnants. So you talked to me about the idea that colonialism introduced binarism. Prior to colonialism, there were fluid gender identities within Mapuche culture. And you have this wonderful work, You Will Never Be a Wewe, where Seba Calfuqueo is in conversation with her grandmother about her identity, and her grandmother is saying, well, the time of this gender fluid identities in Mapuche is in the past. And therefore, you're moving between multiple cultural positions and possibilities. And you told me very clearly that colonialism brings binary structures and rigidity. And that even within nature, within the land, there are multiple fluid gender, multiple identities. I think it's very interesting to think that colonialism brings these structures that then, you know, indigenous societies, I mean, they're imposed on indigenous societies, they're imposed on post-independence cultures, and then they perpetuate. And so within your own work, Stephanie, there are many remarkable narratives across geographical locations, across time, across space. It's almost like a kind of narrative science fiction sometimes, but based on fact. So you're drawn into these incredible stories, but sometimes the most horrendous things are real. And so you have this film that's available online, which is the one where you trace the construction of the National Theatre by Imelda Marcos. Because Imelda Marcos has this vanity project where she wants to have a cultural festival. And within that, and I'm going to hand over you to finish the story, there is a horrible atrocity that happens. And so this is illustrative of a post-colonial, post-independence government then imposing the most horrendous human rights violations and the triviality of life. And maybe you could talk a little bit about this work and tell me what its name is.
Sure, but first I just wanted to say something because in pre-colonial Philippines, we also had the Babaylan, who were shamans who were female, and they were quite central to society. They governed a lot of things. They were very, very important figures. And they communed with the spirits as well, not just in like living life, but in non-living life. If you were male and you wanted to become a Babaylan, you could. You had to transition. And so this was also something that was common in pre-colonial times. And so I just wanted to like mention that to show that there are similarities there. The work that you're talking about is a work that's based, I was looking at kind of ruins in the Philippines, and the ruin that I was looking at was a building that was built by the Marcoses, and it was built in the 80s, and Imelda wanted to build these buildings that were made to look like classical, like Greco-Roman buildings, you know, this idea of like perfect beauty. And so they're beautiful kind of like modernist cubes. The thing is, she wanted this building to rival the Cannes Film Festival, and she wanted to build it in time. So she basically built this in a couple of months when it should have taken a few years. And these workers were working 24 hours, day and night, overtime. And the problem was that the cement wasn't drying fast enough, and the building collapsed. This is the film center in the Philippines, if anyone's familiar with it, in Manila. And so it collapsed, and all of these workers were inside and were trapped in this drying cement. And so
150 workers were drowned in cement.
They were drowned in cement, and it took them a while to figure out. They didn't want to release a statement, so it took them 24 hours to actually say something to the media. Meanwhile, these people were trapped and nothing could happen. So it was a complete devastation. And my parents tell me stories about this building being haunted, you know, and I believe them, and not like, you know, subdued ghosts, but very angry ghosts. So I'm interested in looking at these, I'm interested in architecture, but in different ways. But this building, yeah, something that I was interested in.
I'm totally fascinated with that, because then within both your works, there are invocations of the spiritual, but in very unusual ways. I mean, because in this work, is the figure of the drone a ghost? Because in Stephanie's work, she often uses multiple cameras, but also drones, and the drones embody a narrative, perhaps the fictional narrative brought in, and they float. So you inhabit the viewpoint of the ghost, and you're floating through these spaces while you're then being told these factual histories that are striking, thought-provoking, disheartening, sad, these histories of exploitation, these social and cultural tragedies. Do we have, are these moving? No, they're not moving. And so, yeah,
Sorry,
keep going, thank you.
can I keep going? Oh,
Yep,
keep going. Maybe I can.
you'll land there.
There should be. These are so beautiful too. Okay.
It's not art if there's not chaos.
There we go. Oh, there.
Yes.
So this is just a trailer for it. It's just a minute and a bit. This is called Lumapit sa akin Paraiso, Come to Me Paradise. And it's about Filipina domestic workers in Hong Kong, told from the perspective of a ghost played by a drone. So, yeah, it's from the perspective of the drone, who is voiced by my mother. And you see, I mean, there's a whole story there. I call some of the films that I make science fiction documentaries. I like layering these genres on top of each other, because I don't think documentaries, it's very difficult to do. I find it almost impossible to do. So I think layering genres and perspectives, like the drone. I also used a phone camera in a lot of instances. Gives you a rounder picture of the whole story.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
that was just the trailer there.
That's super. And that reminds me, we're meant to look at some work on water. Seba, let's go click backwards.
Yes.
I want to show this video. This is the performance now in Unlimited. You can show at 1 p.m. tomorrow on Sunday if you want to come. This is the video that I want to show as track.
Did you find it?
This is.
And this video is on show in New York at the Whitney Biennale right now.
Yes.
I think the video.
Yeah, this for us the water is a sacred space. It's a living space. It's a spirit. It's something we have connection. We have a conversation. This work is about the idea of monument. What means a monument in the colonial society or community? And for us, the monument is the waterfall. And this performance was recorded in a space, a water zone, and I finished all the performance in the waterfall. For us, the waterfall is a cleaning space too, for the energy and everything. For me, the spiritual part of my work is very important, connect with the political situation, because I think the spiritual way is something my ancestors keeping with a lot of care and respect. And I think today we need to respect that and try to put the political situation in conversation too. This is the view of the Whitney Biennale. It's in a blue room. I need to say my last name, Calfuqueo, means blue stone, blue flint. And the blue is the sacred color of my community. And I used to use blue in every work with water, because for me, water is a sacred space. The other work about water is kokulen, liquid bean. And Lee Kim Bin talk about the idea of neoliberalization of water, what happened with the water is.
And there's video, I think, as well.
Yeah. And the other things important here is the water for me is a non-binary space. It's a space is not feminine, it's not masculine. Water is fluid. Water can be anything, can be evaporate, can be ice, can be whatever. For me, the relationship with water, the water's mean for me is really important because when I saw water, I saw fluidity.
But that's very interesting because I think there's this book by, what was his name? Is it Bernard Marshall, called All That Solids Melts into Air, which has the same metaphor but for capitalism, which is able to exist in several states at the same time and is exactly the opposite of what you want to talk about. God, I have to remember more about that. I think both of your works are so interesting because within your work, you have a very localized discourse of what's at stake being regional Mapuche, both the violence on society and human bodies and the violence on the landscape. And both are clearly intertwined. The violence on the landscape is the violence on the body. The colonialist extraction practices clearly have political and social and physical consequences, especially for you as a trans artist. Yeah. In Stephanie's work, the violence is something else. It becomes, the land becomes, when we talk about home and what is place, how is home in your work, Stephanie? Because you deal with migrant workers, and like within the video you just showed us, what was the name of it again?
Come to Me Paradise.
Come to Me Paradise. There's a section where workers have, they can go home once every 2 years. They have to live with their employers, and so the only way they can make a private space for themselves is to meet in this square, but sometimes even build tents out of cardboard so they don't go home, because the minute they go home, they're back on the clock working. And so there's this displacement, migration, whether it be the workers on the sea, whether it be the domestic workers in Hong Kong, where is home?
Yeah, it's something that I think about a lot because I'm a child of immigrant parents. So my parents came to Canada in the 1970s from the Philippines under the Marcoses. It was something that I just always thought about because the home, inside the home was one culture and outside the home was another culture. The language, the food, how strict my parents were, all of these sort of cultural things meant one thing inside of the home, and then outside of the home was a totally different thing. So, ideas of what that meant, what did my parents go through to move to another country and have to start from the beginning, all of these things that immigrants have to deal with. How do they create community for themselves? How do they assimilate? How do they find a job? Where do they, all of these things are something that I think we think about as immigrants and child of immigrants. So of course, growing up as a teen and then now as an artist, it's just something that naturally occurs in my work. I always think about how, I'm always interested when I go somewhere else and I see different immigrant communities and how they have created space for themselves. That's really interesting for me. So in this work, Come to Me Paradise, Hong Kong has, I think maybe, 500,000 workers from Indonesia and the Philippines. So if you've been to Hong Kong and you know how little space there is, you understand that there's really no place for the women to go on their days off. On Sundays is their day off, and because they're forced to, by law, live with their employers, they don't want to stay home or whatever their workplace home is. They empty out onto the streets and occupy a space, one of the spaces called Central, which is the finance district in Hong Kong, to basically spend their leisure time. So they build temporary structures out of cardboard to create rooms that they build for the day. And basically, they're on their phones to their families back home mostly. So I always saw this when I was there looking at Hong Kong. This is something that almost became like a spiritual thing because it held such importance for them. They're always with their phones talking to their families back home. So this slide that you see here is a scene from the movie where the phone kind of becomes this sort of spiritual medium for the women. She's closing her eyes and chanting, "Come to me, paradise." And also the character of the drone is a spiritual figure too. There's always this sort of figure that I think maybe duplicates this idea of home in my work, whether it be the drone or the butterfly or the pineapple or something that sort of watches over or becomes this sort of caretaker of sorts.
Brilliant. Now I want to come to you end on both of your works within the fair. So I'd like to go, Stephanie, to go back to your performance before we return. No, I'm sorry, Seba. Seba's performance before we return to your work in Unlimited and before we have 15 minutes for questions with the audience. Sorry about this clicking thing, it's kind of annoying.
The performance?
No, yeah,
Alright.
no, keep going.
Okay. I want to show other things, and I think maybe it's an interesting part of the conversation because we're speaking about the binarisms in the nature and what's happened when the nature is considered binaries.
Yeah.
And for me, for example, this piece is destellos, and destello is a series of ceramics. I used to work with ceramic.
How big are they?
It's like 20 centimeters. This piece is about the pieces outside of my community in the European museums. They have the most important piece for us. They have a very, very long tube, for example, for, I don't know, like 50 centimeters outside of our country. And for me, it's really important to think about that because that means protection for us. It's the way the Mapuche people protect their bodies. And I recreate these pieces, but with a nature connection. This is, for example, digüeña. Digüeña is a fungi, a mushroom. And for us, it's really important the connection with plants, fungi, and other livings, other ways of living. And fungi is very important because fungi has, for example, 25 different ways to reproduce than the binarism way. They can be auto-reproduced. And that is super in other side that the binarism say. And for example, the plants, a lot of plants are hermaphrodites, have both sex inside. And when you look the nature is not binaries. Nature is other way.
Totally, and I had asked both of you if there were any thinkers or philosophers who particularly influenced you, and you brought up Brigitte, what is Brigitte?
Baptiste.
Brigitte Baptiste, who was the director of the Humboldt Forum, who is a biologist and an ecologist and trans.
A trans woman.
And is a trans woman who makes a very clear argument for the equivalencies between queer culture and nature being metaphorically intertwined. And very interesting. And the other person was a Mapuche linguist.
The other important people for me is Elisa Loncon. Elisa Loncon was the first president of the new constitution in my country, and she's a reference because the Mapuche people never has a position in my country. We never speak for us. Always other people speak for us. And for me, it's really important to have voice, and I think this is the moment to take that part of the space, and we have voice, and we can speak for ourselves. And I think it's really important, that representation. And
this comes across so strongly in your performance work for Art Unlimited, where You have text in 3 languages?
Yeah, in 3 languages.
Text in 3 languages, sort of both notating the loss of water rights and the struggle for water rights, and you perform. There's a strange question I want to ask you. What is the significance of bells in your work?
The bells that are used in the performance is the instrument we use to make a rogative, a connection with the water.
And the bells, are they silver?
No, it's bronze.
It's bronze.
And it's very, very heavy.
Ah.
The people don't know that, but my legs is really.
Because when I was fascinated when you did the performance by the way that the fabrics move, but now it makes sense because you become like a sculpture.
Yeah.
There's a huge gravitas as you move. It's very powerful.
Yeah, we used to use that bell when we do a rogative. When you come, for example, this video is Mapokuful. Mapokuful is a 3D animation about the way my people harvest mushroom in the forest. When we go into the forest, we need to permission of the lake to enter for the space, and we use the bells for make a permission to enter that. Yeah.
Wow! So in the piece where you're pulling the fabric through, you're also asking permission with the bells to go through the forest.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. Now we're running out of time. Stephanie. This is a very hard job, guys. We don't have enough time. Stephanie.
Yeah.
Also within your work that you've shown, that it's on now in the parkour, close to Clarastrasse, a straight line out of the fair, you have this work that relates to the video Search to Life that we may not have time to play. And within Search for Life...
The other direction.
Yeah. Is it other direction?
Yes.
Oh, no.
What are you looking for? Oh, the other direction. Within Search for Life, there are many explorations, but we land on the monarch butterfly and different forms of migration discussed, but also the Filipino seafarers.
Yeah.
And I keep asking you about the metaphors of the monarch butterfly because the monarch butterfly does circular migration over thousands of miles every year, and Stephanie explained to me that in every migration the butterflies get stronger and stronger, and by the 3rd migration the butterfly...
Yeah, so the monarch butterfly is something that I'm using in my work now, and you can see it in parkour. There are a couple of veils and like these that are there, along with flowers and then embroideries, bouquets of flowers that are sort of pressed between glass, and they're made to look like butterfly vision, again taking the perspective of this character. The monarch butterfly is a really interesting animal because they occupy the space in the human psyche of transformation, which, as we know, is something that people have written about and painted about. One thing that is amazing is that when they're in the cocoon, they liquefy, and what remains is their nervous system. So when the butterfly is a butterfly, it can remember itself being a caterpillar. This is one of the things that I learned when I was researching about the project. I was speaking to a butterfly specialist in the Philippines. The monarch butterfly... So the monarch butterfly exists in North America, travels from North America to Mexico. The painted lady butterfly is its cousin and travels from northern England to sub-Saharan Africa. So these are very, very long distances of thousands and thousands of kilometers. So 8,000 kilometers and then 18,000 kilometers. The monarch butterfly and the painted lady go over multiple generations. So 6 generations they travel to get to their final destination. So the butterfly that leaves is the great, 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 great grandmother of the one that comes back. On the 3rd generation, the butterfly becomes a super butterfly, they call it, and they become 3 times as large, can fly 3 times as long, and can eat 3 times as more to travel the longer distances.
And their color changes too. They become more white spots, I read.
They do sometimes, yeah. What's also interesting is that in and this is like when I was making the film, there were kind of parallels that came up between the monarch butterfly that the butterfly specialist told me about, and then the seafarers. The butterfly specialist talked about the color orange of the butterfly, which is called aposematism, and it's basically to deflect people, things that would eat them, predators. And so it basically saves their lives. And the seafarer that I spoke to talked about the life jackets and the lifeboats as sort of a life-saving device as well. So brought the two stories together really nicely.
And I asked you about sort of the metaphor of the butterfly because the third generation becomes a super butterfly, but when we think of cyclical migration and migrant laborers and workers, we don't often talk about what's at stake, and the idea is that the future generations are going to benefit from your sacrifices. And like that's why people subject themselves to these horrible labor conditions in the hope that their children and future generations will become the super butterfly, you know, and be able to flourish and be 3 times as strong and, you know, all of those things. But I found it interesting that no one ever lands on this idea of, you know, well, what happens when it becomes a success story for...
Yeah. I mean, I think about that too, because like someone asked me the other day what like it felt to be Canadian, and I like couldn't really answer.
Yeah, maybe you're the super butterfly.
I don't know about that, but I mean, I don't know, like, yeah, my parents, I feel like when I introduce myself, I say I'm Filipino Canadian, but I also don't know what it means to be Canadian because, you know, Canada is a very young country, but before it became Canada, it was Indigenous land. So that in itself creates a problematic thing for me, you know, like what does that even mean? And then going back to the Philippines, you know, I everything looks familiar, things look familiar, but I know I'm not from there, and people know I'm not from there. So it's a bit of I feel like I'm in kind of a liminal space, being the child of immigrant parents. And I think my work tries to address that as well. I mean, I'm interested in migrants and how they find their own space.
Very much so. Well, I think that somehow we are dealing with, through the kind of histories of colonialism, at least a 350-year awareness of being othered. You know, that's when the external records begin of these they say identity is constructed in relation to the other. And so both Filipino and Mapuche identity come out of being forced to construct yourself in conflict with these imposing forces, with sometimes extractive forces, with the struggle to kind of retain identity, whether the identity be that one of nature and the land, or identity being one that is subject to change through migratory labor and unfair conditions. And Kimberly's standing there, which means it's time to ask questions. Thank you so much, guys, for your presentation. This is not over. Does anybody in the audience have any questions? Oh, I see a hand there. Yes, please. We have one here.
Hi, I would like to thank Stephanie and Seba, both, for their amazing work. I'm Iliana. I just wanted to comment basically on what you just mentioned. I think it's important also to highlight that both First Nations and communities that are pre-colonial really pre-existed to everything that they have had to be subjected to, and they have offered and continue to offer very important ways of living from which we have a lot to learn from. And I just wanted to also offer a connection that I find quite moving between both Stephanie's and Seba's practice, which is this silver lining, not maybe so positively, this connecting thread between the legacies of these violences and the contemporary legacies of neoliberalism. And they both try to narrate that at times by leaving the human. And it's a question for both of you on how do you develop that, and how do you think that whilst you work?
It's a great question.
Seba, you can go.
You.
You. You.
It's complicated, the
think,
question. I think I don't know, for me the art world
Yeah.
is, or the art is seen, is always a uncomfortable space, always. Because I don't have reference of my community, have the position that I has now. And for me, it's really conflictive, the space of art, everything. Everything is super conflictive. And that's happened me every day, I think. And living in that situation, and I think it's part of the art. And some point I think we stay here because we decide to living with that feeling. I don't know. I can answer that question really well, but I think the uncomfortable zone is a space for creativity, and a space for don't stay. I don't know, how can I say this? Like stable for everything.
Yeah.
Because sorry.
No, you go.
Because I am not here only with me. Here I am with my ancestors. And my ancestors are every time where I do everything. And they know that, and I know that. And for me, that is my gift.
Yeah, I was going to actually say the same thing when you started talking. But I think through making work, and I think that's why I always have this voice in my work that's narrated from this outside perspective. I feel like that for me is like this connection to something that I'm trying to look for, you know? And I can't quite put my finger on it, but I talk about home a lot because I'm always kind of trying to figure that out. And I feel like that figure or this character is a way to kind of like ground me and like thinking about those things. So it's something that always exists in all of my work, and I always have kind of the same character in all of the work. So I feel like that's how, the connection happens, or like the stabilization.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes. Oh, I see one there and one there.
Hi, thank you very much. It was really inspiring to hear you talk. I have a question for Stephanie. When you talked about this feeling of identity, being Canadian, Filipino, being mestizo myself, mixed race as well, I wonder also, where are the moments that make you feel more connected to your ancestor roots, where living in another country, where do you find that sense of belonging? How do you deal with that sense of belonging when you're in the Philippines, where people might understand that you're not, or I'm not as well, part of the complex network that is there, and how do you deal with that in your work?
I always think about my parents when I'm in the Philippines, and like where they come from, like where they grew up. I try to imagine like their life or something in the Philippines during that time, which is an interesting thing to do because I have no idea. When I'm away from the Philippines, I think the thing that connects me to it is like my family, of course. But then also, I guess like if there's community or friends who are also from the same place. You know, it always feels, and I'm sure you probably feel the same way when you meet someone else who's Filipino. Like when I saw your post about lumpia, I was like, oh, amazing. I mean, the Filipino diaspora is so large and wide, actually, and that actually gives it so much power, because you can find Filipinos everywhere that you go, and you can kind of like play your Filipino card anywhere you go. You'll always get like a free thing from someone, or you'll always get treated specially. So that those small things, like, I think help and feel this feeling of like belonging, non-belonging, or like this space where you're trying to figure out where you belong or something. Yeah, like finding these small things, I think, is a good way to sort of feel connected. In the Philippines, you know, when I'm there, it's seeing family, but then it's also working on projects that I'm interested in. So, yeah, you know, I was looking at practices of shamanism and contemporary Filipino life. So that was an interesting way to like do research and then to connect to something that I have no idea about. Yeah, so these are things that I think help me to sort of figure out those things that I'm looking for.
Thank you. There was a question of the lady in the white just next to you. Thank you. And we have 5 minutes.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I can't hear very well. I just wanted to say thank you both for speaking on your work. That was super insightful and made my brain really excited. But a while ago, we were kind of you were talking about like the super butterfly, or kind of like this next generation of mixed people and mixed culture, both within your practice as well as just like existing. And I'm kind of curious, this question goes to both of you, how you feel in terms of like what your next steps are for building up that community for yourselves. Because I feel like that's kind of a microcosm thing where there's kind of these multiple bubbles that sometimes overlap when it comes to building community, especially in more intersectional, marginalized spaces within the arts. And I'm just kind of curious about like how you're both currently navigating that. And yeah, don't take it too literally, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you. 'Cause you know what? That's a question I was meant to ask. Seba, why don't you start?
Yeah, for me, one important part of my practice is the collective practice. I am part of the Mapuche collective Rangin Tuleufu. That means between rivers. And for me, it's really important the collective practice to do other part of my work, because my work is not only the individual work. And I think my community is about community. It's about making power with other and try to connect with other people and make the things happen in the collective way. For me, it's really important to do that. I'm working as a collective 8 years, and I'm thinking the way to do that is a collective way.
And you're also a
It's the only
teacher, no?
Yeah.
That's really important, I think. Great, thank you. Stephanie?
It's interesting because like when I show work on larger stages and in bigger museums or anywhere really in the world, there's always like a young Filipino artist or art maker who will always come up to me and be like, oh, I've never seen anyone, a Filipino person in this context before. And that always reminds me that it's really important to, like representation is very important, but then also, talking to these young people, because it's true, like I never really saw that when I was growing up. The first show by a Filipino artist in a contemporary space I saw was a Pasita Abad show, and this was 3 years ago. So that, I mean, that's so strange to me, you know?
Oh, and can you talk about, because I asked you who were people who influenced you, and you had a Filipino filmmaker and an artist who I'd never heard of.
Yeah, Pasita, she's deceased now, but she is a Filipino painter, textile artist who makes beautiful, beautiful large-scale sculptures and paintings. And she also talks about migrants. She had this one that I love, this one beautiful painting, textile work about Filipino migrants in Hong Kong. I don't know if you've seen it, but she's incredible. And she's now just in the past, I guess, 5 years, or even less, showing more. But I saw her work at the Jameel Arts Center because my film showed in parallel to her exhibition. And I got really emotional because I'd never seen anyone like me in that space before. So, yeah, I don't know. I thought about that with that question that you asked.
Well, we have a minute left. It's been really great to have you here. And
Wanna ask something?
oh yeah, one last question. Want to squeeze it in? What can we do in 50 seconds?
Thank you so much for your presentation, you both, to show these beautiful works. And I just have a question for Seba. I was wondering about the history of colonization in the territory of Mapuche people. We know very well about the Spaniard crown, but also I'm thinking in the early 20th centuries with the Swiss and German settlers in Gualmapu, in Mapuche territory, and how this is still ongoing and doing a lot of damage in our territories. And also thinking, as a Mapuche person, I'm a Mapuche as well, so I'm living here in Switzerland, and I see how is the idea of renovate energies, the green energies is coming, thinking of the future and trying to be clean, but just in Europe, taking all resources from our lands. So how, as an artist and Mapuche artist, are you seeing that when you have to come to Europe, for example, and you are bringing all these topics? Thank you.
Yeah, for me it's very complicated because for that reason I say I'm living in this uncomfortable zone every time because that happened in the territory. For example, the Swedish, the German has a long colonization, and nobody talked about this before. And we're still living in that neo-colonization too, because a lot of company from the state of Europe make a new colonization in the territory and extract everything. For example, the hydroelectric company in the Mapuche territory make a lot of struggle, and the Swedish and the German and the Norwich and all that country used to be, say, green. They destroy everything or land. And for me, for that reason, it's really important to show this work and my work here in Switzerland, because this is the place that we take everything of them. And you have the privilege here for us.
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, it's always good when Art Basel has an anti-capitalist panel. It does happen every year. Keep it real. What can I say? It seems unfair to stop, especially as the conversation just got real. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for your work, and thank you for this way too short journey into your incredible discourse, both of you. I've learned so much from getting to know you and your work. And everybody in the audience, thank you for coming.
Thank you.